welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Coppermill County, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The year was 1897, and Coppermill County was experiencing an unusually harsh winter. The small town, nestled in the western mountains of Massachusetts, had always been known for its isolation, but that particular season the snow had cut off most access roads for weeks at a time. Temperatures had plummeted to record lows according to the meteorological records preserved in the county clerk's office, with January averaging 15 degrees below zero. The town's approximately 300 residents found themselves more isolated than ever, trapped within the confines of their community as supply wagons from neighboring counties struggled to navigate the treacherous mountain passes. This forced isolation became the perfect backdrop for what would later be described as one of the most methodically executed acts of revenge in American history. It was during this period of intense isolation that the events surrounding the Copper sisters began to unfold, events that would continue to reverberate through the decades, leaving a trail of inexplicable deaths and disturbing questions in their wake. Vivian and Matilda Copper lived in what locals referred to as the Ridge House, a Victorian structure perched atop the only hill overlooking Coppermill's main street. Built in 1878 by their father, Everett Copper, the mansion stood as a testament to the family's wealth and influence in the region. With its 3 stories, multiple chimneys, wraparound porch, and distinctive copper-lined roof that had long since developed a green patina, the house was both admired and regarded with a certain unease by the townsfolk below. The sisters were in their mid-30s, unmarried, and had inherited both their father's substantial mining fortune and his imposing residence after his passing in 1895. Vivian, the elder at 37, was known for her sharp intellect and even sharper tongue. She had studied chemistry at a women's college in Boston during the 1880s, an unusual pursuit for a woman of that era, before returning to Coppermill upon her father's declining health. Matilda, 2 years younger, was quieter, more reserved, with what town records described as a penetrating gaze that seemed to unsettle those upon whom it fell. She had reportedly traveled extensively through Europe in her 20s, studying what she vaguely referred to as traditional medicinal practices. For most of the townspeople, the Copper sisters were merely eccentric recluses, women who had chosen solitude over society and whose wealth allowed them that particular luxury. They were seen occasionally in town purchasing supplies or attending to business matters, but rarely engaged in the social fabric of Coppermill. They hosted no parties, attended no church services, and extended no invitations to their Ridge House. What many didn't know, or perhaps chose to ignore, was the dark shadow that had hung over the Copper family for decades. According to county records recovered in 1954 by historian Dr. Howard Mercer, Everett Copper, the sisters' father, had acquired his fortune through means that many considered dubious at best. The copper mine that made him wealthy had previously belonged to 3 separate families, all of whom had sold their shares under circumstances that raised questions even among the most incurious minds. The property transactions recorded between 1871 and 1873 showed a pattern that should have raised alarm, wrote Dr. Mercer in his unpublished manuscript found years later. Each sale occurred shortly after a family tragedy. The Patterson family sold after their patriarch suffered what was described as a sudden mental collapse. The Rooks family relinquished their share following the disappearance of their eldest son, and the Warrens sold their portion after mysterious fire destroyed their home. In each case, Everett Copper appeared at precisely the moment when the families were most vulnerable, offering sums that, while not insignificant, represented mere fractions of the property's true values. The timing was so precise, so opportune, that it suggested something beyond mere coincidence or business acumen. Yet, in the economic climate of the 1870s, with the country still recovering from the Civil War and local authorities more concerned with maintaining order than investigating property transactions, these suspicious patterns went largely unnoticed. The mine itself, located 3 miles north of town in the foothills of Mount Greylock, proved exceptionally productive under Copper's ownership. Within 5 years, he had transformed from a moderately successful businessman into one of the wealthiest individuals in western Massachusetts. The copper extracted from the mine, known for its unusual purity and distinctive reddish hue, supplied industries across the Northeast, from electrical companies to architectural firms. By the 1880s, the copper mining company employed nearly a third of Copper Mill's working population, creating a relationship of economic dependence that effectively silenced any lingering questions about how Everett had acquired his holdings. These coincidences might have remained just that, coincidences, had it not been for what happened in the winter of 1897 and the subsequent discoveries made decades later. The first indication that something was amiss came on January 17th, when Silas Hammond, the county's only doctor, was called to the Ridge House to attend to Vivian Copper, who was reportedly suffering from a persistent fever. According to Hammond's medical journal, discovered in 1961 during the renovation of the old county hospital, his visit was brief and uncomfortable. Miss V. Copper presented with no discernible fever, he wrote. She appeared in perfect health, though her manner was distracted. The house was kept at an unusual temperature, far too warm, and there was a peculiar odor throughout, something akin to copper pennies left too long in one's pocket. Miss M. Copper remained in the adjoining room throughout my visit, speaking only once to inform me that my services would no longer be required after that day. Hammond noted that as he was leaving, he heard what sounded like groaning coming from the basement, but attributed it to the house settling in the cold. His journal, typically meticulous in its observations, contained an unusual addendum to this entry, written in a hand that appeared less steady than his usual script. I find myself unable to recall portions of my visit to the Ridge House with clarity. There was a tea offered, which I declined, a moment by the fire that seems extended in my memory, and a peculiar metallic taste that remained in my mouth for hours afterward. 3 days later, on January 20th, Vivian Copper was seen at Harrington's General Store purchasing an unusual amount of lye, several new shovels, and over 20 yards of heavy canvas. When questioned by the shopkeeper, Morris Harrington, she simply stated they were preparing for spring cleaning early this year. Harrington, whose detailed ledgers and customer notes proved invaluable to later researchers, recorded that Vivian's hands were stained with what appeared to be chemical burns, and that she spoke with a detached precision that he found unsettling. The receipt for this transaction was preserved in the Harrington family records and was discovered in 1957 by Dr. Mercer during his research. Alongside the listed items, Harrington had made a personal note. V.C. appeared altered, eyes distant, spoke of cleansing and preparation, mentioned something about justice taking physical form, paid with silver coins that appeared newly minted despite the mint marks indicating production in the 1860s. It was the last time anyone in town reported seeing either of the Copper sisters for nearly 2 weeks. During this period of absence, several residents living near the Ridge House reported unusual activities at the mansion. Jeremiah Holt, whose farm bordered the Copper property, noted in his personal journal that for 3 consecutive nights, lights could be seen moving in the basement windows, dancing like fireflies, with no discernible pattern. Martha Wellington, whose husband delivered coal to the Ridge House, reported that upon approaching the service entrance on January 23rd, she heard what sounded like a chorus of whispers, all speaking different words simultaneously, which caused her to abandon her delivery and flee. These accounts, dismissed at the time as superstitious fears amplified by winter isolation, would gain new significance in light of later discoveries. On February 2nd, Matilda Copper appeared at the town's postal office to mail several thick envelopes addressed to lawyers in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. According to Postmaster Jenkins's log, she appeared haggard and thin, as if recovering from illness, and paid for expedited delivery with silver coins that appeared tarnished with some dark substance. When Jenkins offered his condolences on her apparent illness, she reportedly smiled in a manner he described as hollow and distant, and said, "The illness has passed from us to those more deserving." In a personal letter to his sister in Boston, discovered in the 1960s, Jenkins elaborated on this encounter. "There was something profoundly wrong with Miss Copper's appearance that I struggle to articulate. Her skin had a translucent quality, as if I could almost see through to what lay beneath. Her eyes seemed somehow older than when I had last seen her only weeks before, and there was a vibrance to her movements, a fluid grace that contradicted her apparent physical exhaustion. I felt in her presence as if I stood before someone who had undergone a fundamental transformation, though I cannot explain the nature of that change." Jenkins thought little of the exchange until the following day, when Zachariah Rooks, the sole surviving member of one of the families who had sold their mine shares to Everett Copper, was found dead in his modest home at the edge of town. According to Sheriff Calloway's report dated February 4, 1897, Rooks's death appeared to be from natural causes, heart failure brought on by advanced age and the bitter cold. The deceased was found in his bed, appearing peaceful, though with an expression that some might describe as surprised. There were no signs of struggle or forced entry. The only unusual aspect was that all of his personal papers appeared to have been recently sorted through, though nothing of value was reported missing by his housekeeper. So what the sheriff failed to note, or perhaps deliberately omitted, was that Rooks had been in perfect health the day before, as attested by his housekeeper, Martha Quinn, in a statement she would give decades later to Dr. Mercer shortly before her own death in 1959. "Mr. Rooks was never stronger," she told Mercer, according to notes found in the historian's effects after his disappearance in 1968. "He had just received a letter that morning that put him in high spirits. Said something about justice coming around at last. I found him the next morning, and I'll tell you this. I've seen my share of dead men, and there was nothing natural about the way Mr. Rooks went. His eyes were wide open, and there was this look of recognition on his face, like he knew exactly who had done this to him." Quinn's testimony, recorded by Mercer on a series of wax cylinders that were later transferred to magnetic tape, continued with details absent from the official record. There was a letter clutched in his hand, expensive paper with a copper-colored wax seal. The contents were brief. "Your debt comes due. Your father's sins return to you." It was signed with 2 intertwined C's. I showed it to Sheriff Calloway, but he took it and said it wasn't relevant. Next day, he told me no such letter had been found. Within the week following Rooks' death, 2 more elderly residents of Coppermill died under similar circumstances. Wallace Patterson, the son of the first family who had sold their mine share, and Edgar Warren, the last living member of the third family. In each case, Sheriff Calloway ruled the death as natural, unsurprising given the harsh winter and the advanced age of the deceased. Yet, in each case, there were whispers of irregularities. Patterson's housekeeper reported that his room smelled strongly of metal the morning she found him. Warren was discovered clutching a small copper coin in his right hand, his fingers so tightly closed around it that they had to break his fingers to remove it after rigor mortis had set in. According to a statement from Dr. Hammond, who examined all 3 bodies, There were other similarities that troubled him professionally, but which he was discouraged from including in his official reports. In each case, the deceased exhibited an unusual pallor that I have never encountered in my medical practice. The skin had a waxy translucence, almost as if drained not just of blood, but of some essential vitality. The eyes, even hours after death, retained a quality of awareness that is, frankly, impossible from a medical standpoint. And in each case, I detected the same metallic odor I had noticed at the Ridge House weeks earlier. These details, omitted from official reports, surfaced only decades later through personal journals and correspondence uncovered by various researchers. By mid-February, the deaths had caused a quiet unease in Coppermill, but it wasn't until February 20th that true alarm began to spread through the town. On that morning, Sheriff Calloway himself failed to appear for his duties. His deputy, finding this unusual, went to the sheriff's home and discovered the man dead in his study, slumped over what appeared to be the beginnings of a letter. The incomplete letter, preserved in the county archives and discovered during a cataloging project in 1963, read only, "I fear I have made a terrible mistake in the matter of the Copper sisters. What I initially dismissed may, in fact, be." The letter ended there, the pen having dragged a long ink line down the page as Calloway collapsed. What wasn't included in the official record, but was later discovered in the deputy's personal papers, was that Calloway's study contained several items related to the Copper sisters. Spread across his desk were property records for the mine, handwritten notes regarding the deaths of Rooks, Patterson, and Warren, and a small journal bound in red leather that appeared to have belonged to Everett Copper. The journal was nowhere to be found after Calloway's death, and the deputy, Alexander Dawson, would later write in his private correspondence that he suspected someone had removed it from the scene before a proper investigation could be conducted. Of particular note was Dawson's description of Calloway's body. The sheriff's appearance disturbed me greatly. His skin had the same waxy quality as the previous victims, and his eyes held that same terrible awareness. But most troubling was the fact that his hair, which had been salt and pepper gray the previous day, had turned completely white. Whatever he had discovered or whatever had found him had literally frightened the color from his hair. The deputy, sensing something more sinister than coincidence, immediately gathered a group of town men and headed to the Ridge House, intent on questioning the Copper sisters. What they found there has become the subject of speculation, partial records, and local legend for over 60 years. According to the deputy's official report, the Ridge House was abandoned. The sisters were gone, along with most of their personal belongings. The house was immaculately clean, unusually so, noted the deputy, with the strong smell of lye permeating every room. In the basement they found freshly laid concrete, covering what had previously been an earthen floor, according to those who had been in the house before. The report made no mention of what happened next, but a personal journal belonging to one of the men present, discovered in an attic in Coppermill in 1960, filled in the gaps with disturbing detail. Dawson thought he saw something embedded in the concrete, wrote Jeremiah Hayes in his journal, a corner of something like a picture frame. We broke through the still soft concrete and found not a frame, but a small wooden box. Inside were 3 pocket watches, each belonging to Patterson, Warren, and Rooks. Their initials were engraved on the backs. Alongside these was Sheriff Calloway's badge, which no man would remove willingly, and a folded piece of paper containing what appeared to be a recipe, though none of us could determine for what. The ingredients listed made no sense. Essence of fear, breath taken in sleep, blood of the guilty. Putros. Hayes continued, below these items was a false bottom, and beneath that a daguerreotype showing Everett Copper standing over 3 men seated in chairs, their expressions vacant, as they signed what appeared to be documents. Standing in the background, barely visible but unmistakable to those of us who knew them, were the Copper sisters as young women, watching the proceedings with expressions I can only describe as anticipatory. The discovery prompted a more thorough search of the house, but no further evidence was found, at least according to official records. Hayes's journal, however, indicated otherwise. We found a locked room in the attic containing dozens of small vials, each labeled with names and dates. Many of the names belonged to people long dead in Coppermill. Some vials were empty, but 3, bearing the names Patterson, Warren, and Rooks, still contained a few drops of a clear liquid. Dawson, curious, removed the stopper from Patterson's vial, and the faintest whiff that escaped made him immediately collapse. He revived minutes later with no memory of the incident. What troubled Hayes most, according to his journal, was not just the discovery itself, but the reaction of some of the other men present. Harrington and Smith seemed reluctant to document what we found. They insisted that some things were better left unreported, that the town had suffered enough unease. When Dawson pressed the matter, Smith took him aside. I couldn't hear their conversation, but afterward Dawson agreed that the official report would make no mention of the vials, the daguerreotype, or the recipe. I find myself wondering what Smith said to change the deputy's mind so completely. The most disturbing discovery, according to Hayes, came when they moved an ornate Persian rug in the sisters' study, revealing a set of words burned into the wooden floor. As they took from Father, so we take from them. Justice does not die. It merely hibernates. A county-wide search for the Copper sisters was initiated, but they had vanished without a trace. Train station records showed no tickets purchased in their names, and no stagecoach driver reported carrying women matching their description out of town. It was as if they had simply evaporated from Coppermill, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of unease. The case might have ended there, relegated to local legend, had it not been for a series of deaths that occurred in Philadelphia, New York, and Boston over the following months. In each city, prominent lawyers were found dead under mysterious circumstances, each having represented wealthy industrial clients in mining acquisitions. Each lawyer was found with a small copper coin placed under their tongue, though this detail was excluded from newspaper accounts of the time. The first of these deaths occurred on February 28, 1897, when Philadelphia attorney Harrison Montgomery was found dead in his office by his secretary. Montgomery, a senior partner at Blackwell and Montgomery, had specialized in representing mining interests during the economic expansion of the 1880s and 1890s. According to the coroner's report, he died of apparent heart failure, with no signs of foul play. What the report omitted was the discovery made by his secretary, Margaret Wilson, who in a private letter to her sister wrote, "When I found Mr. Montgomery, his expression was one I shall never forget. Absolute recognition and terror combined. When the undertaker prepared his body, he discovered a small copper coin beneath his tongue, which I recognized as identical to those minted by the Copper Mining Company of Massachusetts." Most disturbing was Mr. Montgomery's appointment book, which showed a meeting scheduled for that morning with the Mrs. C. Ray, Historical Mine Acquisitions. Similar deaths followed in New York on March 15th, Attorney James Winthrop, and in Boston on April 2nd, Attorney Frederick Hollingsworth. In each case, the pattern was identical: apparent natural death, expression of recognition, copper coin beneath the tongue, and a scheduled meeting with women whose names were recorded only with initials. Connections between these deaths and the Copper sisters might never have been made if not for the work of Dr. Mercer decades later. During his research in 1968, he discovered correspondence between the sisters and these very lawyers, all dated from the weeks before their disappearance from Coppermill. One such letter from Vivian Copper to Harrison Montgomery read, You may not remember us, Mr. Montgomery, but we certainly remember you. Your legal maneuverings on behalf of our father in 1872 are well documented in his private papers. The coercive tactics you endorsed, and indeed suggested, resulted in the acquisition of property through means that, while perhaps technically legal, were morally reprehensible. We believe it is time for a reckoning. We have information that would be of great interest to you and suggest a private meeting to discuss this matter further. It appears the Copper sisters had been methodically collecting evidence regarding their father's business dealings, Mercer wrote in his notes. The evidence suggests Everett Copper had used some form of coercion, possibly even poisoning, to force the three families to sell their mining shares. The sisters had discovered this after their father's death, possibly from his private papers, and had spent 2 years planning what can only be described as an elaborate revenge. According to Mercer's research, the sisters had access to their father's private journal, which detailed not just his business dealings, but a more disturbing aspect of his activities. Everett Copper had apparently discovered or developed a method of influencing individuals through what he described as essence extraction and manipulation. His journal, fragments of which were preserved in copies made by the sisters and later discovered in a safety deposit box in New York in 1954, described the process in terms that blended chemistry, folklore, and something approaching the occult. The essence resides primarily in the breath quest, Copper wrote. Captured at the right moment, when fear or desperation is at its peak, it contains properties that, when properly processed and administered to another, create a state of extreme suggestibility. I have refined the process to require only minimal exposure, a few drops in a cup of tea, the vapor rising from a warmed sample near a subject's bedside. The effect is temporary but profound, allowing for acquisitions and agreements that would otherwise be impossible to obtain. What made the case particularly disturbing to Dr. Mercer was not just the calculated nature of the revenge, but the implications of how it was carried out. The evidence suggests the sisters had discovered or developed some form of poison that left no trace and mimicked natural death, he wrote. But more disturbing are the references in their correspondence to something they referred to as essence harvesting, a process they hinted allowed them to capture the final moments of their victims' lives in those vials we now know were found in their attic. This theory gained credence when Mercer discovered a letter from Matilda to Vivian, apparently written during a period when Matilda was traveling in Eastern Europe in the late 1880s. I have found what Father only glimpsed. The Roma woman in Budapest confirmed what we suspected. The essence can be taken completely, not just sampled. The process she demonstrated was crude but effective. I have refined it considerably. With the proper preparation, and at the moment of transition, the entire essence can be captured, and more importantly, it can be consumed. The effects of this consumption are precisely what we theorized. I look forward to demonstrating upon my return. Mercer's research took a dark turn when he began exploring folk traditions that had existed in the remote areas of western Massachusetts in the mid-1800s. He discovered references to practitioners who claimed to be able to capture a person's final breath, and with it a portion of their life force, in specially prepared containers. What if, he posited in his final notes, the Copper sisters had discovered a way to not only kill those they held responsible for their father's crimes, but to somehow capture their essence in the process. The folklore describes such captured essences as being useful for extending one's own life or for inflicting suffering on others. Dr. Mercer's research ended abruptly in 1968 when he disappeared while visiting Coppermill to examine the now abandoned Ridge House. His notes were found scattered in his hotel room, along with a hurriedly scrawled final entry. They're still alive. They must be. The dates match. Boston, 1927. New York, 1947. How did I not see it before? Same pattern, same copper coin. They haven't aged. I found a photograph from San Francisco, 1965. It's them, unchanged. How are the local authorities dismissed Mercer's disappearance as an academic who had become too invested in his research and had likely suffered some sort of breakdown. They suggested he had simply left town, abandoning his work. His body was never found. What the authorities didn't report, but which was documented in a private letter from the hotel maid to her cousin, was the state of Mercer's room after his disappearance. The papers were not just scattered, but arranged in a deliberate pattern, almost like a ritual circle. In the center was a small copper coin that seemed brand new despite its date of 1872. Most disturbing was the mirror, which had words written across it in what looked like lipstick, but which could not be washed away. Curiosity has its price. Yours was particularly steep. Interest in the case faded until 1967, when renovation work began on the old Ridge House, which had remained abandoned since the Copper sisters' disappearance. Workers uncovered a hidden sub-basement containing an elaborate laboratory with equipment that experts of the time couldn't fully identify. Among the items discovered was a journal belonging to Matilda Copper, water-damaged but partially legible. The discovery of this hidden laboratory caused considerable excitement among both local historians and scientific researchers. Dr. Jonathan Pierce, a chemistry professor from MIT who was called in to examine the equipment, wrote in his preliminary report, "What we found beneath the Ridge House represents a level of sophistication that shouldn't have existed in the late 19th century. The glass distillation apparatus incorporates design elements that wouldn't become standard until the 1940s. Several of the measuring devices use principles that weren't theorized until well into the 20th century. It's as if someone had access to scientific knowledge decades ahead of their time." Particularly puzzling was a series of glass containers connected by copper tubing to what appeared to be a modified medical ventilator. Pierce noted that the apparatus seems designed to capture and process gaseous materials, possibly human breath, though for what purpose I cannot determine. The copper components have unusual properties. They conduct electricity at rates that exceed standard copper conductivity by nearly 40%, a metallurgical anomaly I cannot explain. Also discovered were dozens of small glass vials, most empty, but a few containing traces of a clear fluid that, when analyzed, proved to have no identifiable chemical composition. As Pierce described it, the substance appears to be mostly water, but with molecular structures unlike anything in our reference databases. When examined under an electron microscope, the fluid exhibits patterns of organization that almost resemble neural networks, though this is, of course, impossible for a non-living substance. Most disturbing of all was a leather-bound ledger containing what appeared to be records of procedures conducted in the laboratory. The entries, spanning from 1895 to 1897, included names, dates, and notations about quality and potency, followed by clinical observations of the subject's responses. The final pages contained what seemed to be a formula or recipe with ingredients and proportions listed in a coded script that researchers were unable to fully decipher. The journal, now preserved in the Massachusetts State Historical Society archives, contains passages that continue to disturb historians and scientists who have examined it. February 1st, 1897. The final preparation is complete. The essence extraction process that V and I perfected has yielded results beyond our expectations. Father's notes were correct about the fundamental process, but woefully inadequate regarding the refinement methods. We have improved upon his work significantly. The essence, once properly distilled, provides exactly the effect we sought. R will be the first to experience it tomorrow. After decades of prosperity built upon our father's ill deeds, justice will finally visit him. February 3rd, 1897. R is done. V administered the catalyst while I collected the essence. The moment of recognition in his eyes, when he realized who we were and why we had come, was worth the years of preparation. His essence is particularly potent. P is scheduled for tomorrow. February 7th, 1897 W proved more difficult than anticipated. His house had unexpected visitors requiring us to wait 3 additional hours in the cold. The delay affected the potency of the catalyst, necessitating a more direct approach. V was concerned about marks or evidence, but I assured her our method leaves no trace detectable by current medical science. His essence, when finally collected, had a peculiar quality, almost effervescent. I suspect this relates to the heightened state of anxiety he experienced in his final moments. February 15, 1897. The sheriff grows suspicious. He visited today asking pointed questions about our whereabouts on the dates of the unfortunate passings, as he called them. We offered tea, which he declined. A pity, it would have been a simpler way. Now we must accelerate our timetable and include him in our calculations. February 19, 1897, all local accounts are settled. The lawyers remain. They were as complicit as the families, drawing up their fraudulent documents, knowing full well what pressures had been applied to obtain signatures. The essences we've collected will sustain us for the journey. We've prepared packets for each of our remaining subjects. The beauty of our method is that no one will connect these seemingly unrelated natural deaths across different cities. February 25, 1897, Philadelphia. H.M. received us with the practiced charm of a man accustomed to manipulating others. His expression when I showed him Father's journal entries detailing their collaboration was everything I had hoped for. V. administered the catalyst while I prepared the collection vessel. His essence had a particular richness, perhaps due to his advanced age and accumulated experiences. The consumption ritual performed afterward produced the expected results. I feel remarkably invigorated, and V reports that the small lines around her eyes have completely vanished. Father never understood the true potential of what he had discovered. The final legible entry in the journal has become perhaps the most discussed among those who study the case. The essence, once consumed, grants not just life, but time. Father never understood the true potential of his discovery. He used it merely for influence and coercion, but V and I have unlocked its full capability. With each essence properly prepared and consumed, we gain not just years, but decades. We will have all the time we need to find every last person who profited from the suffering of others. And when they are gone, perhaps we will find new deserving subjects. Justice, after all, never truly ends. It merely finds new vessels through which to express itself. This disturbing description of what appears to be some form of life extension through essence consumption has been the subject of intense debate among researchers. Those who approach the case from a scientific perspective suggest that what the sisters described might have been an early form of hormone therapy or stem cell treatment, described in the mystical language available to them in the late 19th century. Dr. Amelia Hawthorne, a medical historian who studied the case in the 1980s, proposed that the Copper sisters may have stumbled upon a method of extracting and processing adrenal or pituitary compounds from their victims, glands that we now know play crucial roles in aging and stress responses. Their description of essence could be a primitive understanding of hormones or neurotransmitters, which weren't identified by medical science until decades later. Others, particularly those who study folklore and the history of esoteric practices, point to similarities between the sisters' methods and obscure European traditions. Dr. Marcus Blackwell, an anthropologist specializing in folk medicine, noted in a 1975 paper that the concept of capturing a person's final breath, and with it, some vital essence, appears in traditions across Eastern Europe, particularly in regions where the Copper Sisters' mother originated. These practices were generally metaphorical or symbolic, but the sisters appear to have developed a method of making the metaphorical literal through some combination of chemistry and techniques lost to history. Whatever the true nature of their process, the implications are profoundly disturbing. If the sisters did discover some method of extending their lives through the deaths of others, they represent something unprecedented in criminal history. Perpetrators whose crimes span not just years, but generations, and whose motives transcended simple revenge to encompass a warped vision of cosmic justice. The implications of this journal entry led to a re-examination of unsolved deaths across the country, spanning the decades following the sisters' disappearance from Coppermill. Researchers identified over 30 deaths between 1897 and 1967 that followed the same pattern. Individuals who had become wealthy through questionable business practices, found dead of apparently natural causes, each with a small copper coin somewhere on their person, usually hidden in a pocket or shoe where it wouldn't be immediately discovered. Among these cases was the 1927 death of Boston industrialist Cyrus Whitcomb, whose textile factories were notorious for dangerous working conditions and the exploitation of immigrant labor. Whitcomb was found dead in his study, apparently from natural causes, though his butler reported that he had been in perfect health the day before. According to the butler's statement to police, discovered decades later, Whitcomb had received 2 female visitors the afternoon of his death, elegant ladies of indeterminate age whom he had never seen before. After their departure, Whitcomb had locked himself in his study and was not seen alive again. The coroner's report, obtained in the 1960s by researchers, noted the unusual condition of the body. Subject exhibits extreme pallor and unusual rigidity. The eyes remain extraordinarily clear for a body discovered 12+ hours after death. There is a faint metallic odor that cannot be attributed to environmental factors. Similar cases emerged in Chicago, 1934, Detroit, 1941, and New York, 1947. In each instance, the victim had a history of questionable business practices or exploitation, had received female visitors shortly before death, and was found with a small copper coin somewhere on their person. The medical examinations consistently noted the unusual pallor, clear eyes, and metallic odor. The last confirmed case fitting this pattern occurred in San Francisco in 1965, the same city where Dr. Mercer claimed to have found a photograph of the still youthful Copper Sisters. The victim was Gabriel Harmon, a real estate developer who had made millions displacing low-income residents through manipulated property laws. He was found dead in his office, slumped over his desk, apparently from heart failure. The cleaning staff reported finding a small copper coin in his vest pocket, though this detail was omitted from official reports. What made this case particularly significant was the existence of security camera footage from the building lobby, showing Harmon greeting 2 women who matched descriptions of the Copper Sisters based on 19th-century photographs. The women's faces were never clearly visible to the camera, but their posture, dress, and the distinctive way one of them gestured with her left hand while speaking strongly resembled known descriptions of Vivian and Matilda Copper. A photograph taken at a gallery opening the night before Harmon's death shows him speaking with 2 women whose faces are partially obscured, but who bear a striking resemblance to the Copper Sisters, based on the few photographs that exist from the 1890s. The women were never identified or located for questioning. In 1969, a year after Dr. Mercer's disappearance, the Ridge House in Coppermill was destroyed in a fire of unknown origin. The blaze was so intense that it consumed not just the structure, but melted much of the laboratory equipment in the sub-basement, effectively destroying any remaining evidence. Fire investigators noted that the blaze appeared to have started simultaneously in multiple locations throughout the house, suggesting deliberate arson, but no suspects were ever identified. The fire itself became something of a local legend in Coppermill. According to witnesses, it began shortly after midnight during a particularly cold January night. Martin Fletcher, who served as the town's volunteer fire chief at the time, described the blaze in a recorded oral history taken in 1987. "I've fought fires for 30 years, but I never saw anything like that night at the Ridge House. The flames were unusual. They burned with a greenish-blue tint that I've never seen before or since. And the smell wasn't like a normal house fire. It had this sharp, metallic quality that burned the nostrils and made several of my men physically ill." Fletcher went on to describe how the fire seemed to resist their efforts to extinguish it. "We'd get one section under control and another would suddenly ignite, as if the fire had a mind of its own. Water seemed to have minimal effect. In some places, it almost seemed to intensify the flames rather than douse them. We fought that blaze for 7 hours, and by morning, there was nothing left but ash and a few blackened foundation stones." Most disturbing was Fletcher's account of what he claimed to have seen in the final hours of the fire. As the main structure was collapsing, 2 figures appeared to walk straight out of the flames at the back of the property. I only caught a glimpse, 2 women in dark clothing, moving with purpose toward the woods beyond. I called out, thinking they might be injured, but they never turned or acknowledged me. When I tried to follow, I found no footprints in the snow where they should have been. I've never spoken publicly about this because who would believe such a thing, but I know what I saw. Fletcher's account was dismissed by officials as the product of exhaustion and smoke inhalation. Yet 3 other firefighters present that night reportedly had similar experiences, though none would go on record with their stories. All 3 left the volunteer fire department within months of the incident, and one, Joseph Merrick, reportedly moved away from Coppermill entirely, telling friends he could no longer sleep soundly in a town where the past refuses to burn away completely. The case of the Copper sisters might have faded into obscurity had it not been for a series of letters delivered to various historical societies and universities in 1968, the same year as Mercer's disappearance. Each letter contained fragments of information about the Copper case, along with previously unknown details that were later verified through independent research. One such letter, received by Columbia University's Department of Historical Research, contained a detailed description of Everett Copper's original essence extraction process, along with chemical formulas and procedural notes that experts determined would have been impossible to fabricate without intimate knowledge of both late 19th century chemistry and the specific work conducted in the Ridge House laboratory. The letter concluded with a personally chilling note to the department chair. "Professor Hamilton, your grandfather's shipping company transported the chemicals father needed for his earliest experiments. The ledgers in your family archive would confirm this, should you care to look. Some culpability, however distant, touches more lives than you might imagine." Professor Hamilton, reportedly disturbed by the letter, took a leave of absence to investigate its claims. He never returned to his position and was found dead in his family's summer home in Maine 3 months later. The cause was listed as heart failure, and a small copper coin was discovered in his jacket pocket during the funeral preparation. The letters were signed simply V and M and included a postscript that has become infamous among those who study the case. History belongs to those who survived to write it. We are still writing. The methodical nature of the sisters' revenge, spanning decades and continuing long past when they should have died naturally, suggests something beyond normal human capability. The consistency of the deaths, the copper coins, and the reports of women matching their description decades after they should have died of old age all point to a disturbing possibility that the essence consumption described in Matilda's journal was not metaphorical but literal, and that it somehow extended their lives far beyond natural limits. No further communications have ever been confirmed from the supposed Copper sisters. However, The pattern of deaths, wealthy individuals who built their fortunes through questionable means, dying of seemingly natural causes with copper coins found on their persons, has continued sporadically into modern times. The most recent potential case occurred in 1966 in a small town outside Boston, where a retired banking executive was found dead in his study. The official cause was listed as stroke, but his housekeeper reported finding a small copper coin clutched in his hand and mentioned that two women had visited him the previous day. Elegant ladies, she described them, who looked like they stepped out of another time. What makes the Copper Sisters case particularly disturbing to modern researchers is not just the methodical nature of their revenge or its apparent continuation over decades, but the implications of their method. If we are to believe the fragmented records and journals, the sisters discovered or refined a process that allowed them to somehow capture the life essence of their victims, using it to extend their own lives well beyond natural limits. The scientific community has, predictably, dismissed such claims as impossible, artifacts of superstition, or deliberate myth-making. Dr. Eleanor Chambers, a biochemist who examined the copper case in the 1970s, wrote, "What the sisters referred to as essence extraction was likely a sophisticated form of poisoning, perhaps using heavy metals or organic compounds that would have been undetectable using 19th century methods. Their apparent longevity is almost certainly a case of mistaken identity or deliberate deception perpetuated across generations." Yet those who have studied the case most closely remain disturbed by the consistency of the evidence and the pattern that has emerged over more than 7 decades. The copper coins, the expression of recognition described on the victims' faces, the smell of metal reported at multiple death scenes across different decades and locations. The photographs from different eras showing women bearing remarkable resemblances to the Copper Sisters. In 1964, historian Patricia Lathrop, who had spent years researching the case, wrote, "What troubles me most is not the possibility that the Copper Sisters discovered some method of extending their lives, though that is certainly disturbing if true. What truly unsettles me is the implication that they felt justified in their actions. Their father had apparently wronged others and used some form of coercion to build his fortune. Rather than seeking legal justice, the sisters chose to become judge, jury, and executioner, not just to those directly involved, but to their descendants and associates across generations." Lathrop continued, "If we accept even a portion of the evidence as accurate, we are forced to confront the disturbing possibility that somewhere in America there exist two women who have appointed themselves arbiters of justice, dealing death to those they deem deserving, sustained by some process that extends their lives far beyond natural limits. They move among us, unchanged by time, carrying out what they consider to be righteous vengeance." In her private notes, discovered after her death, Lathrop went further. "The most terrifying aspect of the Copper Sisters is not that they might still exist, but that they might be right. If their father truly did use some form of essence manipulation to coerce others, and if they have perfected that process to extend their own lives, then they represent a form of justice operating outside all normal human constraints. They are, in effect, immortal judges, accountable to no earthly authority, guided only by their own interpretation of justice. And that is a prospect that should terrify us all." Balance. Lathrop's research ended when she suffered a stroke in 1965 while examining records in the Massachusetts State Archives. A small copper coin was reportedly found in her pocket after her collapse, though her assistant, who made the discovery, retracted this statement in subsequent interviews. The assistant, Margaret Foster, later resigned her position and disappeared from public records entirely. Attempts to locate her in the 1970s were unsuccessful. The last verified document relating to the Copper Sisters is a letter received by Boston University's History Department in 1968, shortly after Dr. Mercer's disappearance. The letter, written in elegant script on paper that analysis later determined originated from the 1890s, contained only a brief message. Dr. Mercer asked too many questions, but in the end, he provided useful answers. His essence was particularly potent, the essence of the truly curious always is. We continue our work as we have for 70 years, unseen yet ever present. Justice has a long memory, and we are its custodians. The letter was signed The Copper Sisters and included a postscript. We do hope you won't make the same mistakes as Dr. Mercer. Some histories are best left unexplored. Well, following the receipt of this letter, Boston University's History Department abruptly discontinued its research into the Copper case. When questioned about this decision, the department chair, Dr. James Harrington, simply stated that some historical matters are better left to rest. He retired unexpectedly the following year, moving to a remote cabin in Vermont where, according to local reports, he refused all visitors and maintained no communication with his former colleagues or students. Since this final communication, no further documented evidence directly linked to the Copper Sisters has emerged. The case remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in American criminal history, not because of the number of victims, which is relatively small compared to other serial cases, but because of its extraordinary duration and the methodical, almost ritualistic nature of the killings. The impact of the case extends beyond those directly affected. Researchers who have delved too deeply into the Copper mystery have often found themselves experiencing unusual phenomena: persistent metallic tastes, vivid dreams of suffocation, and in some cases, brief periods of memory loss. Several have abandoned their research altogether, citing concerns for their personal safety or mental well-being. In 1972, graduate student Thomas Reynolds, who had been researching the Copper case for his doctoral dissertation at Harvard, abruptly withdrew from his program after making what he described in a letter to his advisor as a discovery that changes everything. Reynolds's research materials disappeared from his university office the same day, and he reportedly left the country, eventually settling in a small village in the Swiss Alps, where he refused all communication regarding his former research. What happened to Vivian and Matilda Copper? Did they truly discover some method of extending their lives through the essences of their victims? Are they still alive, moving through society, identifying and punishing those they deemed deserving of their particular brand of justice? Or is the entire case a complex web of coincidence, rumor, and myth that has grown with each retelling? Perhaps most disturbing is the possibility raised by several researchers. If the sisters did discover some method of capturing life essence, what happens to those essences after they are consumed? Are the victims truly gone, or does some fragment of consciousness remain, trapped in whatever process the sisters devised? In his final recorded interview before his disappearance, Dr. Mercer addressed this question with a disturbing hypothesis. The folklore that I've studied suggests that captured essences retain something of their original consciousness, a shadow of the person, if you will. If the Copper Sisters have indeed been capturing and consuming these essences, it raises the horrifying possibility that their victims experience a kind of half-life, aware but powerless, possibly for as long as the sisters themselves continue to exist. This theory remains, thankfully, unproven. Yet it adds an additional layer of horror to an already disturbing case, the possibility that the sisters' revenge extends beyond death itself, trapping their victims in some form of conscious non-existence. In 1975, parapsychologist Dr. Sylvia Montgomery conducted experiments using objects allegedly connected to the Copper Sisters, including a small copper coin found in the possession of one of their suspected victims. Montgomery claimed that when holding the coin during a meditative state, she experienced overwhelming sensations of being trapped, aware but unable to move or communicate, as if sealed within an airless space. She described hearing whispered conversations between two women discussing the quality and potency of various specimens, though she could not make out specific words or details. Montgomery's research, dismissed by mainstream academia as pseudoscientific, nonetheless raises disturbing possibilities about the nature of the sisters' activities and their victims' ultimate fate. If even a fraction of these claims have validity, the implications are profoundly disturbing. The Ridge House where the Copper sisters lived has long since been reduced to ash and foundation stones. The laboratory where they conducted their experiments destroyed in the fire of 1969. The copper mine that started the cycle of revenge closed in 1920, its tunnels flooded and forgotten. The town of Coppermill itself has dwindled to a fraction of its former size, now barely a dot on Massachusetts maps. Yet locals still avoid the ridge where the house once stood. They speak in hushed tones of strange lights, sometimes seen there on particularly cold winter nights, and of a persistent metallic smell that occasionally drifts through town when the wind blows from the north. Most dismiss these as small-town superstitions, but those familiar with the Copper case cannot help but wonder. The land where the Ridge House stood remains undeveloped, despite its prime location overlooking what remains of Coppermill. Multiple attempts to purchase the property have fallen through under mysterious circumstances. The most recent, in 1965, involved a developer who planned to build vacation homes on the site. After visiting the property, he abruptly withdrew his offer and, according to associates, refused to discuss his reasons. He died of an apparent heart attack 3 months later. A small copper coin was found in his desk drawer during the settling of his estate. Yet the legacy of the Copper sisters persists in academic circles and among those who study unusual criminal cases. Their methods, if the fragmented records are to be believed, represent something beyond normal human understanding, a bridge between science and folklore that most rational minds refuse to cross. In 1968, following the disappearances of both Dr. Mercer and the delivery of the final letter attributed to the Copper sisters, the Massachusetts State Historical Society officially closed their file on the case, declaring it historically significant but functionally unresolvable. They placed the existing documentation, what little survived the fire, water damage, and the passage of time, into sealed archives with restricted access. A note attached to the file written by the Society's director at the time offers perhaps the most fitting conclusion to this disturbing case. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. Some truths are not meant to be known. The case of the Copper sisters falls into both categories. We archive this material not to encourage further investigation, but to serve as a warning to future generations. Justice and vengeance are separated by a line so fine that those who pursue one often find themselves consumed by the other. If the accounts are accurate, the Copper sisters crossed that line in the winter of 1897 and never looked back, leaving behind a trail of deaths spanning 7 decades, deaths delivered in the name of justice, but bearing all the hallmarks of calculated revenge. Their story serves as a chilling reminder of how easily the pursuit of justice can transform into something far darker when left unchecked by compassion or law. As for the sisters themselves, if they still exist in some form, if their method of essence capture truly granted them extended lives, they would be well over 160 years old today, their origins lost to history, their appearances likely changed through time or deliberate disguise. They could be anywhere or nowhere. Their work could be finished or continuing still. In the decades since the last confirmed communication from the Copper sisters, there have been scattered reports that might be connected to their activities, In 1974, a Wall Street financier implicated in a massive fraud scheme was found dead in his Manhattan apartment, apparently from natural causes. His housekeeper reported that he had received 2 female visitors the previous evening, elegant older ladies, whom she had never seen before. A small copper coin was discovered beneath his tongue during the autopsy, though this detail was omitted from official reports. Similar cases have emerged sporadically. A corrupt judge in Chicago, 1982, a pharmaceutical executive whose company had suppressed evidence of dangerous side effects, 1991, a technology mogul known for exploitative labor practices, 2001. In each case, the pattern remains consistent. Questionable ethics, female visitors, apparent natural death, copper coin. If these deaths are indeed connected to the Copper Sisters, it suggests their work continues into the modern era, their targets evolving with the times, but their methods and their moral code remaining essentially unchanged. They remain, in effect, vigilantes, operating beyond the reach of time or law, dispensing what they consider justice to those they deem deserving. Perhaps the only certainty in this unsettling case is uncertainty itself, and the disturbing possibility that somewhere, even now, 2 women who have appointed themselves as agents of justice continue to move through society, identifying those they deem deserving of punishment, leaving behind only small copper coins as signatures of their passing. In the words attributed to the sisters themselves, justice does not die, it merely hibernates. The Copper Sisters case reminds us that some of the most disturbing horrors are not supernatural monsters or demonic entities, but human beings who, believing themselves righteous, cross moral boundaries that should never be crossed. It is a reminder that justice without mercy or oversight can become something far darker, a relentless vengeance that, like the sisters themselves, refuses to die a natural death. As we conclude this account, one final note deserves mention. In 2015, Boston University received an anonymous donation of historical materials related to New England industrial development. Among the documents was a single sheet of paper, apparently torn from a journal, dated December 1st, 1965. The handwriting matched samples known to belong to Matilda Copper. It contained only one sentence. After all these years, we find the work continues, for human nature changes little, and those who would profit from the suffering of others are never in short supply. The paper was accompanied by 2 small copper coins, dated 1872, in mint condition.